There's a bit of a beauty in classic Mega Man's structural simplicity. While each individual Mega Man game can be a little indistinct from one another, I've always been fascinated by the way the sub-series have evolved the formula over time. That was, at least until they took the series back to square one. A return to basics can be a welcome change of pace, and I definitely wouldn't say no to an official Mega Man 12 or X9. But my biggest hope for the next main series Mega Man title is a true follow-up to the ZX games. Mega Man's iterative design is like a glue that kept the whole foundation of the franchise together, no matter how much it changed in tone or art style. That pick-your-order level style, where you gradually get more kitted out with the abilities of the bosses you defeat, is just very compelling. It's no wonder it managed to last through multiple generations and a few whole shifts in genre. This is probably why, when it comes to the indie scene's takes on the style, I very much gravitated towards ones that hold their own spin to it. They have the 8 colorful themed bosses and all that, but there's still more to the game that make them their own. A newer prime example of this being Gravity Circuit. Gravity Circuit arguably keeps things just as simple as classic Mega Man, at most being a bit more like the X series. But it applies the base elements flawlessly and very cleverly while adding its own spin to your power set. Rather than use a lemon shooter, or even a sword for that matter, Kai prefers to fight with his fists and a grappling chain. The chain is mostly a movement option, being able to attach to basically any surface that isn't spikes and swing around, which is such a rush when you finally get the hang of things. The chain is also your sole base ranged attack, so you aren't completely defenseless from a range. It's mostly just slow and not as cool looking, especially compared to bobbing, weaving, and wall jumping around enemy fire to really get in their face and start wailing on them. But what the chain also does is grab enemies you defeated and turn gray so that you can hold them and chuck their bodies at other enemies. Against most of them, it's a one-hit kill, the idea being you keep chains of tossing enemies and other enemies going for as long as you can keep it up. The movement to support this is super smooth. Rather than having a dash, Kai goes into a full sprint when you hold a button down, drastically altering your momentum. Kai becomes just a little too slippery for my own good, but I'm also clumsiness incarnate, so probably just me. Nonetheless, it's a lot like a Mario run button. You cannot hold it down to have a bit more control over yourself, but the more you master the level layouts, the more you can hold it down to really smoothly glide through all the stages. It's brilliant how much the intro stage just tells you everything you need to know about the game as quickly as possible. Not only giving you a crash course on Kai's basic moveset, but just as part of the intro cutscene, Kai demonstrates the game is all about knocking enemies into other enemies. And even later in the same level, it shows Kai chain grabbing, just in case you haven't tried that yourself. It just shows how much confidence the game has in its simplicity that it can just give you brief tutorials, not by text boxes or button prompts, but by having Kai demonstrate the action. Just quick, snappy, and to the point. See this cool thing he's doing? You can do that too. There is a training level, but it's also completely optional. So it's still smart to have all this here, just for those players that skip that. But below the surface are the chips and burst techniques, which act as a way to build and tailor your own play experience. I do wish there were a bit more exciting chips, because a lot of them are reduced damage from hazards, reduced knockback, useful, but also very suit and tie. Not that exciting, at least not compared to the more actionable chips, like having a whole double jump, the ability to float, turning your slide into iframes, and the ability to pull yourself into punching range of an enemy you hit with your chain. For my recording run in particular, I took a point to not rely on the double jump as much to engage with more of the platforming. And in doing so, I found that chain dashing has a lot of cool moments to it. Kind of my new favorite chip. When you defeat one of the 8 main bosses, you unlock 2 of their moves as equipable burst techniques. Think the robot master weapons, but they're all treated as super moves and share a single resource bar. They're all fairly solid picks, all of them having their fair share of uses. Even the base 4 you start with, while basic, are still good all-arounders that are decent for any situation. You can equip up to 4 at a time, but you're able to freely equip and unequip them to tailor your moveset at any possible moment. I tend to have gravitated towards distance detonation, just pretty straightforward, gets the job done. But I've also liked Optic Circuit's laser, Wave Circuit's shockwave attack, and of course, the parry. The visual audio feedback makes using these techniques satisfying, between the cool electronic sounds, the crunchy sounds of enemies taking damage and bumping into each other, bosses getting hit so hard by your attacks they just start rapidly spinning out of control, like the very force of your attacks are breaking the laws of physics. The game doesn't pull its punches either. Nothing quite intimidatingly hard, but a lot of the stages have standout moments that put your maneuverability and movement to the test. But what makes it even better is how easy it is to just slide into a flow state with this game, like a frantic zen sort of mood. My favorite way to master a game is to make a playthrough as fast and efficient as possible, which is large part why I love Mega Man games so much in the first place. Gravity Circuit supports this so much by matching its pace with well-oiled controls that make me feel at one with the player avatar. Each stage has a distinct identity and theming to go with the personality of the boss associated with it, with the bopping energy of Wave Circuit's level having a lot of moving parts and demanding you keep on the move. Power Circuit has electrified floors that hurt you whenever projectiles of the enemies hit it, making for a very create-your-own-pace type of situation. You can wait it out until danger passes, but you're also encouraged to get in there before the enemies even get a chance to shock the ground. Optic Circuit's overheating plant stage is a quick man light, egging you to keep a move on, but with less punishing traps. In general, this game is less and more punishing at the same time. There's no such thing as an instant death hazard, landing on spikes or into a pit putting you to the last time you're on solid ground. Still dealing a hefty chunk of damage, so, fail enough times and you're done. But it feels pretty balanced out given health pickups are actually kinda rare in this game. Enemies don't drop any health, so they're only found in the set locations out in the open or occasionally in chests. The checkpointing is fairly generous, with there being no lives in this game, which to me is only a good thing since lives always felt a little antithetical to the process of learning a game. The function checkpoints also serve as that you can buy full health restores at them. You'll just need to not overly rely on them since the price of repairs goes up each time you use it in a stage. Inflation's even got its grip on robot society. Ugh. Dying and respawning isn't much of a workaround either, since respawning also empties your energy meter, meaning you'll either have to buy a refill or go without and save it back up over time. This can perhaps leave new players a little naked when fighting bosses since you lose out on such a vital part of your arsenal, but especially during my first playthrough I noticed that just encouraged learning the boss's patterns before I committed to buying my EN back, thinking, okay, I know their ins and outs now, I'll get him this time. Just like their stages, the bosses in this game are a test of your skill, leaving you to learn each one's patterns and tells. And I love how their personality ends up shining through to their actual fight mechanics. Shift Circuit naturally moves too quickly for you to react to just his movements, but he always has a little animation to signal what he's about to do. He's unbelievably fast, but he can't resist the allure of showing off. Medley, true to her personality, is flighty and showy and hard to close the distance on. Cypher Circuit employs a lot of trickery and deception between leaving his clones behind, keeping you guessing on where he himself will stop, as well as trying to spawn a bed of spikes under your feet. Brake Circuit might be the hardest of the main 8 bosses to me, really demanding you keep an eye on him and what he's doing. But there's also the conveyor floor moving around and minding every time he causes basically any form of impact you'll have rocks falling on your head. Just a lot going on, I love its energy. They're all satisfying to fight, none of them feeling like a sour spot. To this point, I'm not even sure they have boss weaknesses like they do in Mega Man, and I kinda don't even care. Fighting them with whatever you want your loadout to be is just that fun. Though, to that end, Clone Array does feel like every boss's weakness. The trio of stages after the main 8 feel like a gratifying final gauntlet to test what you've learned, even bringing back elements from old stages and remixing them a bit. They even have some of the cooler fights in the game, like Not Kai and the final boss. Not Kai is such a cool mirror match fight, pulling out all the stops, like equipping chips and using some of your techniques against you. I always love these kinds of fights that basically go, okay, how do we turn the main character's moveset into a boss? Cause Not Kai's attacks, while a little exaggerated, are still very much the same to regular Kai's. Having this game's obligatory boss rematch be part of a single boss fight is a cool idea. I just kinda wish it didn't checkpoint me every 2 bosses beaten, cause I'd like to get through the whole endurance run if I can. Command Circuit and the Brainwashed Colonel might just be one of my favorite final bosses from a 2D action game that I've played. It's a hell of a tough fight, and there's no breaks, no healing, no breather phase, not even a checkpoint. Just you, these two, and a 5-phase final exam. All of this backed by a killer soundtrack. I really don't want to turn a whole section of the video into a listen to the music bit, but it's so tempting. Just about every stage theme is an energetic bop or rockin' tune. It doesn't even lean too hard into being quote-unquote retro. Not that that bothers me. It's very Mega Man X inspired, down to having a lot of the same samples, or at least very similar ones. But what really makes this soundtrack its own is how it includes other electronic and synth instruments. Like how the stage theme for the Speed Robot Car Guy, of course, throws some Eurobeat in there. And what would a Mega like be without a stage select theme that gets you pumped for where you're about to go next? Just gotta get away from the music, I'd be here all day. It matches the soundtrack with a really slick pixel art style. Not even necessarily NES or SNES, just really nice pixel art. They get a lot of expressiveness out of these characters for a cast that are all wearing faceplates, so you have nothing to read off them other than their eyes and posture. Again, just really serves to get everybody's personality across. All the stages are bright and colorful, as you'd expect, but I think one of the more eye-catching elements is Kai's laser scarf that trails behind him, creating a nice line of action. It is interesting how much of the game they make diegetic, even to the point where dying and respawning is contextualized as Kai being blown to pieces before the gravity circuit itself reconstructs him at the last checkpoint. There's also little details like how replaying a stage engages a simulation, and any collectibles you gather in the simulation are gathered by the soldiers in the real world. Or how during the final boss, each retry has you fighting Colonel again, but he's all zombie violet and reanimated. The story itself supports this presentation, with how the big twist is that Kai isn't the original gravity circuit, but that the circuit attached itself to a new host when its old one could no longer function. As much as I did see not Kai's true identity coming a bit, I do like the very subtle foreshadowing that you probably wouldn't notice on a first playthrough. But when replaying, you notice things like how not Kai's body in the healing pod is curiously missing the circuit. It's just gone between then and the previous shot, because in said previous shot, he's being approached by who you would first assume is somebody from the Guardian Corps, but it turns out is actually who would eventually become Kai. It's just showing the twist, but cutting off before you get any context. Or how Kai and not Kai literally have the same theme, just with different tones. It's smart writing for how simple the story is, and the character writing itself shines through a lot. Especially the lovable goof Colonel who can't resist a corny joke when doing mission briefing. Oh, I guess that's why he's called Colonel, huh? There is some open-endedness in the ending. I suppose in the event they want to do a sequel with some deeper lore about the Masters, who are still left a mystery as to who they are or why they're sending robots to terraform planets for them, or if they're even still alive for that matter. But there is the murmurings about how this is just one arc of many, each one with their own set of 10 circuits, potentially to be a new lineup of bosses. Which, you know, I love this game even as just a standalone. That sort of thing just sounds like video game sequel hooking to me. I do like Commander Circuit as a villain, albeit he doesn't get a ton of screen time to be one, just by the nature of his existence being a surprise. He's not an absurd cartoon villain, but he's also not one of those misunderstood hero or villain that makes a good point types. His personal wants were just wanting to travel through space again, because the universe is just a pretty place. It's selfish, of course, since leaving the planet would mean all the robots would shut down, but it's humanizing in a strange way. I find it tough to even go out of my way to find bad marks on this game. Basically, my only overarching thing being some enemies are unflinching when they're punched. It makes sense for enemies that are closer to stage hazards or for the bigger enemies. But then these snowman head guys are just the toughest guys ever, apparently. Or these bats. Bats! It's always video game bats. But even then, it's far from a game breaker. It just requires a bit of self-reminding and a change of approach. So it's like the nittiest of picks. And again, some of the techniques undermine some of the difficulty, but you can also just not use them. It's a simple but stellar 2D action game with a decent challenge and tightly knit stage design that I've not felt since Shovel Knight or the first time I played the first Mega Man X. It's perhaps not as hard as most of Mega Man's more difficult entries, but it nonetheless hits all the right notes and feels fresh and inspired to very easily stand on its own. Perhaps the Mega Man series is doomed to stay in this limbo state of just re-releasing old games, but I'll at least know its core lives on in good hands.